Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to Ask an Ecologist. I'm Suzanne Simpson with Bayou Land Conservancy, and each week I take your queries and take a deeper dive into the wonderful world of nature in your backyard and beyond. Without any further ado, let's get to your questions this week. Our first question was submitted by Faral Siddiqui, who asked, "What's the best way to deal with poison ivy? It's on my fence and I would like to get rid of it, but don't want to use chemicals as there are a lot of bugs and birds in the area." Well, something interesting about poison ivy is that humans are the only species that have the allergic reaction to poison ivy. So to birds and bugs and other wildlife in your yard, poison ivy can actually be a really useful plant because it produces berries every year. So keep in mind that if you are able to live with it in your yard safely and just stay away from it, I encourage you to do so because it is a plant that is utilized by wildlife. But if it's not safe for you to have poison ivy in your yard for whatever reason, there is a natural recipe that you can use to reduce its population. So the recipe is essentially a saltwater solution where you have 1 cup of salt per 1 gallon of water, mix it together and add a little bit of dish soap and put it in a spray bottle, and you can spray it directly on the poison ivy to kill it. Now, you're going to need several applications for it to work, and it may be over a period of a couple of years before the poison ivy is eliminated. You also want to make sure that you are directly applying the solution to the poison ivy only, because it can, the saltwater solution can damage other plants in your garden. So direct application is important, and applying a saltwater solution consistently over time can help reduce your populations of poison ivy if you cannot safely live with it in your garden. Thank you for the question. All right. Next question was submitted by Natasha R. Aarons Thornton. She submitted 2 questions. We're going to answer both of them. Number 1, I have a lot of tiny ash tree seedlings growing in my yard. I am thinking of putting them in containers to grow and then give them to people who want to plant trees. But I was wondering, are ash trees okay for our area? I've only lived here a few years. Well, depending on where you moved from, you may already have some familiarity with ash trees and why you are asking a really important question. First of all, I think it is awesome that you want to spread the love of trees to all of your neighbors. The ash tree is a little bit of a sticky wicket because since the emerald ash borer was discovered in Michigan in 2002, it has devastated populations of ash throughout the country. The emerald ash borer is a beetle, and it's native to Asia, and it has really devastated ash populations across the country. We have not experienced that scale of devastation in Texas, but it does exist here. It's been found as close to Houston as Dallas. And so it's not a non-issue. There are urban foresters with the Texas Forest Service that are trapping for the emerald ash borer to see if we have populations here. So it's normally the answer would be absolutely give the seedlings to your neighbors. But with the emerald ash tree, I have to be a little bit more conservative with my judgment because of the potential for the tree not to survive an invasive insect that may one day make its way to Houston. It may not, but it may. And so my overall advice is to contact the Texas A&M Forest Service and see what they recommend. And I'll send you a direct message so you can get some contact info because it's an important question to ask. And I want to make sure that you're given the appropriate resources to handle that. But keep on keeping on with your ash tree. I hope it stays healthy for a long time. I grew up with an ash tree in my yard, and I have great memories of ash trees. So I hope it continues to do well. The next question submitted is that I want to make a frog or toad habitat and for dragonflies, but not sure of the best way to do that here in Houston. Well, luckily, Houston already has the perfect climate for the animals that you have listed in this question. a big step to creating a successful habitat for frogs or toads or dragonflies is going to be establishing a water source. So a bird bath or a pond that has some running water so it doesn't just become a huge pit for mosquitoes in your backyard is going to be an important first step to establishing a frog or toad habitat. And then one of the most fun things that you can do to see what frogs are in your backyard is create a tiny frog house using a PVC pipe. So you can go to your local Home Depot or Lowe's and pick up PVC pipes that have thin walls and are about 1.25 inches in diameter. You can cut them to about 3 feet in height and use a rubber mallet to hammer them next to your water source. And tree frogs will take up residence in those PVC pipes. Whenever I was doing my master's work at the University of Florida, that was how I collected my sample size on the tree frog that I was studying, was by setting up PVC pipes and then taking a look at them. You can decorate the PVC pipes. It can be a really creative quarantine project. So I encourage you to do that. And if you find any in your yard, be sure to send us a photo. We'd love to see your habitat. All right. Okay, I'm going to move to the main topic of our conversation this week, which is the giant Asian hornet, or the Asian giant hornet, aka the murder hornet. Now, whenever you have a large insect with a nickname like murder hornet that enters the United States during a global pandemic, you are going to have some media buzz around you, pardon the pun. And so entomologists everywhere have been getting hit up with the questions of, what do we do about this hornet that has been discovered, and how is it going to impact our honeybee and native bee populations? So first, I want to give a little bit of background. This hornet was found recently in Washington State. It's native to the Asian continent, and it was also found in British Columbia. So it's been found in the Pacific Northwest recently. And there are two topics specifically that I want to cover. Is number one, its threat to humans, and number two, its threat to honeybees and our native bumblebees. So in terms of the threat to humans, what you've probably seen in the media stories is that the stinger of the Asian hornet is able to penetrate beekeeper protective gear, and that it delivers a really painful sting. And that is true, but in terms of it being a murder hornet for humans, it is very, very unlikely that you would actually be killed by the sting of an Asian giant hornet. So it's less of a Jumanji situation than maybe playing out in your mind. Now, in terms of its threats to honeybees and our native bumblebees, that's where it gets a little bit more nebulous. So giant Asian hornets are capable of decimating bee colonies using a behavior that is literally called slaughter and occupy. So that sounds pretty scary. Now, Japanese honeybees have evolved a defense mechanism against the Asian giant hornet that prevents their colonies from being quite so devastated from it. But whenever you take a species that is native to somewhere else and you plop it in a new ecosystem with other species that aren't evolved to interact with it successfully, that's where you can create a problem. And that's what the concern of apiarists everywhere is that our honeybees aren't evolved to deal with the Asian giant hornet. Now, as a reminder, the honeybees that we have in America are originally from Europe. So we have European honeybees. And the next few months and few years of trapping are going to be really, really important to determining how much of an issue the Asian giant hornet is going to be to our honeybee population and our native bee population. The life cycle for the Asian giant hornet begins in April. So in May, June, and July, chances are we're going to see the observations of this hornet increase in the Pacific Northwest. But entomology experts have been very measured about the overall impact of what they think this insect may have on native bee populations. Very few of them have jumped to thinking this is going to be anything even approaching a catastrophe. It's been a lot. It's been sensationalized a bit through the news articles, but entomologists are kind of taking this sit and wait approach, depending on how the trapping is able to go in the next couple of months. In terms of its impact specifically in Texas, the giant Asian bee prefers warm, wet summers, which we have, and cold, dry winters, which our winters don't get super cold down here, as you know, so we may not have appropriate habitat for this insect to even migrate all the way down here. And spread its distribution to our bees. But it's certainly a topic that we're going to want to keep an eye on. But I don't want to minimize what the hornet could do, but I think there's been so much catastrophizing of what this insect is capable of that I want to bring in a little bit of a devil's advocate approach that chances are, if the trapping is able to be successful, there may only be a very localized impact to the honeybee and native bee populations. The worst thing that we can do always is panic and start killing everything in your yard that doesn't look like a honeybee, because chances are you will be killing a native bumblebee, and they really need our help for conservation. So it's important to be able to identify what's in your backyard so you don't make that kind of mistake. And stay tuned to see how those trapping efforts take place in Washington State and whether or not they're able to minimize and control the spread of this insect. It's in a lot of ways very similar to controlling the spread of a virus or a bacteria. And fast, effective action is important in order to minimize the spread. We just had a question come in from Aaron Valley, who said, "What is it that the hornet does to the honeybee?" It separates the bee's head from its thorax, and so it's not a pretty situation. But I would say that the Asian hornet isn't the only insect that does that to honeybees. A lot of our red wasps and our yellow jackets also prey upon bees in that way. The thing is that the Asian giant hornet does it to an entire colony potentially, and so that's where it begets its name. So yeah, Aaron, not great news. But overall, stay tuned to see what the further developments are in this story. And thank you for tuning in to Ask an Ecologist this week. You guys submitted some great questions. Remember that you can submit a question via Facebook comment, Facebook message. You can send us a video comment, and you can reach us out by email at info@bayouland.org. My name is Suzanne Simpson. As always, it was a ton of fun to hang out with you guys, and I will see you next week.